The ending of the book of Samuel isn't what we would expect. I wonder if you're starting to gather that by now. Rather than bringing this book to its chronological narrative conclusion, the author does something different. They end with this epilogue that's made up of curated stories and poems. Because rather than showing us the end of David's life, you can see that in 1 Kings, they care more to bring us to a thematic conclusion. To remind us what we are supposed to take away as we end the book. So they end with this epilogue. If you want to know more about the design of this epilogue, I'd refer you to our email for this week. We've got a chart that really breaks down the design. I think it'll help you wrap your head around it better. But here's the TLDR. If you don't know anything else about the epilogue, here's what you should know. The epilogue of Samuel is structured in what we would call a chiasm. That's a Jewish literary device. And don't worry, this isn't just a Bible nerd fact. It's actually helpful to understand this because the way that chiasms work is they don't put the most important things at the end. They structure things to have the most important messages at the center. Finding the most important part of a chiasm is kind of like digging for buried treasure. And in the epilogue, 2 Samuel 22 and the beginning of chapter 23 are the center. Which means this is where we're supposed to be looking for the buried treasure. This is where the author is saying to us, here's what I want you to take away as you leave this book. So what's the buried treasure we're supposed to find? Well, I think we get a big clue in verse 1. The author says to us, David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. Well, when was that? Oh, quite a while ago. This poem is actually taking us all the way back to the end of 1 Samuel and the beginning of 2 Samuel, when David became king over the unified tribes of Israel. He conquered Jerusalem, he defeated the Philistines, he brought the ark to Jerusalem, and he made a covenant with Yahweh. This poem is bringing us back to a previous David who was at the pinnacle of his reign in his golden years. Why would they do that? I think it's because the buried treasure the author wants us to find is that this is David at his best. Right? David at the beginning of 2 Samuel. That is David at his best. And we need to remember what David at his best was like, because as the anointed king of Israel, David is supposed to point us forward to the future hope of the ultimate Messiah, the ultimate anointed one, who is still to come. At the end of the poem, it says, great salvation God brings to his king. He shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his offspring forever. David and his offspring. Haven't I heard about David's offspring somewhere else in this book? Oh yeah, it's in 2 Samuel chapter 7, when God makes a covenant with David promising, I am going to raise up one of your offspring to be my everlasting king over my everlasting kingdom. The buried treasure that this epilogue wants us to find is that David at his best, in his finest moments, gives us a glimpse, a foretaste of who the ultimate Messiah is going to be. He's supposed to point us forward to Jesus, right? The ultimate anointed one of Israel. And I think it's important that we remember this as we leave 2 Samuel, because as we have followed David to the end of his life, he's kind of spiraled out of control. He's fallen, and fallen hard. He's failed multiple times. But the author wants to say to us, yes, David has failed, and that is okay, because there is coming a king who will not fail, who will do what is right in God's eyes, not his own, who will lay down his life for others, who will be completely righteous. David is just a glimpse of who this king will be. So, as we come towards the end of Samuel, would you take some time to reflect on what you've learned? You've walked with David for weeks and weeks and weeks now. When have you seen David at his best? What were his best moments, the best aspects of his character? How does he point you to Jesus? When our Bible reading plan team was meeting and deciding to go through these books, one of the things I distinctly remember Matt saying is that if you want to know Jesus, you should really get to know David. Because Jesus sees himself stepping into this story as a new David. We're about to head into the Advent season where we think about Jesus coming and stepping into this role. And I hope you'll join us in the new year as we read Matthew and learn about the new David. One of the most important titles that Jesus is given is Son of David. If you want to know Jesus, you should really get to know David. You have got to know David, friends. So what has he taught you about Jesus? I hope you take some time to reflect. I'll see you for the next one. Take care.